Sir, what's your position on the Great War?
It warms my heart that peace has been restored.
How about the Spanish flu?
I look forward to its end.
Suffrage.
Equal votes for all.
Now, how do you feel about prohibition?
Oh no, don't panic, just stay calm. You can do this, Senator. Just stay calm and give a nice, measured response.
No comment.
Hey everyone, I'm Gabbie Heinzelman.
And I'm Travis Spangenberg. Welcome to Know Your Onions.
Prohibition was one of the most pervasive cultural issues for decades in American history. It could do a lot to sway local and state elections, but oddly enough, it did not do much to sway presidential elections. In fact, it was rare that presidential candidates even touched on the subject. So what was it about Prohibition that made it so taboo to discuss?
One of the biggest reasons Prohibition was politically risky to talk about was the very nature of the issue itself. It was nonpartisan. Throughout our history, many issues have fallen neatly along party lines, so their chances of passing depended entirely on the balance of party power at the time. This is the final vote for the Revenue Act of 1913, which established the first income tax after the ratification of the Income Tax Amendment. The bill had been introduced by Democrats and had near universal support from the rest of the party. With a majority in both houses, their success was a sure thing. The majority of yes votes came from Democrats, and the majority of no votes came from Republicans. Now, just 4 years later, the final vote to send the Prohibition Amendment to the states for ratification looked quite different. It was a truly bipartisan effort, with a proportion of yes votes and no votes almost perfectly shared by both parties. So in the end, it wasn't the balance of party power that mattered for Prohibition, but the balance of wet and dry politicians in Congress. The parties themselves could be filled with officials and voters of either persuasion.
So what does that mean for a national campaign? If you're running for president, you've got to get votes from across the country in order to make it into the White House. Take William McKinley, for example. Despite having advocated for total alcohol abstinence as a young lawyer, he made very little mention of it during his 2 presidential campaigns. He believed in the cause, but decided not to talk about it. Why? Here's the electoral map from his second campaign in 1900. Look at the states President McKinley ended up carrying. Had he declared support for Prohibition, would he have secured states with high percentages of European immigrants and a healthy brewing culture like New York or Wisconsin? If he'd voiced opposition for it, what would have happened in prominent temperance strongholds like Kansas or Ohio? Either way, precious electoral votes were at stake.
McKinley's silence was by no means rare either. Let's take a look at the party platforms over the years. Here are all the major candidates in presidential elections from the time that the Women's Christian Temperance Union was founded in the early 1870s all the way up to the end of Prohibition in 1933. Now let's see what happens when we eliminate all candidates whose party platform in that election made no mention of temperance, prohibition, or liquor. That's right. Out of 25 candidates over 60 years of elections, only 7 of them made any mention of the issue in their official platforms. It wasn't addressed by both parties in the same election until it was already a constitutional amendment. And what did those platforms say? Well, the early mentions in the 1880s and 1890s were hardly stunning endorsements of a dry America. We sympathize with all wise and legitimate efforts to lessen and prevent the evils of intemperance and promote morality.
Of course, the topic was unavoidable once Prohibition actually went into effect. But that doesn't mean that either side took a brave and bold stance on the issue. In fact, for 3 of the 4 elections that took place during Prohibition, both parties generally agreed that Prohibition should be fiercely enforced. But both sides believed that they could do it better.
It wasn't until 1932 that public opinion had soured enough that somebody could take a strong stance against Prohibition. It was only then that Democratic challenger in that election, Franklin D. Roosevelt, felt safe enough to boldly call for the total repeal of Prohibition as a major part of his campaign. Now, his opponent, incumbent President Hoover, he called for reforms rather than all-out repeal. Arguably, it was the only election in American history where the need for prohibition was hotly debated.
In 60 years of elections, one of America's most passionate cultural issues went ignored and avoided by candidates for the nation's highest office. Still, as we've learned, they can't ignore the liquor question forever.
Can you repeat the question?